disabilities are smart. I think that that's the first place where I want to start. These kids are bright by definition. So all of these kids, if we do an intellectual test on them, they all have average to above average levels of intellectual ability. Many of our kids actually fall in the gifted range. So these are really, really bright kids who, due to specific neurodevelopmental issues in terms of their processing of information, so how they take in information, how they work with that information, have difficulty with academics. So it impacts on their ability to do reading or to do math or to write. And we call that a learning disability, when there's a significant discrepancy between how smart a kid is and what they're able to show what they know. So can they show what they know? Can they do math and reading and writing? And what we know about these disorders, while we think about them in elementary school and high school, is that they're actually lifelong, and they stay with kids into adulthood. So there's certainly a great need for us to get kids on a good path so that they can navigate well and understand how they learn best. And that is a lot of what my clinical work and our research work together does. One of the things that I think that people don't realize about learning disabilities is that they extend beyond the walls of the classroom. And what I mean by that is that most kids who have learning disabilities, a large number of them, suffer from mental health issues as well. So it may not be that they have a mental health disorder, but certainly many of them struggle socially, to navigate complex social situations, to understand sort of how do you read cues, even if you think about a room like this. How do you make conversation? How do you understand what the appropriate way is to act? How do you interact with those people around you? And they also have more difficulty with mental health. So we know that ADHD, for example, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, commonly co-occurs at least 50 to 75% of kids, as well as anxiety, depression, increased suicidal risk, and increased stress. So there's a couple, when I learned about kids with learning disabilities and mental health issues, I was really interested in this. And one of the reasons why I was interested in this is I was wondering, why are these things likely to co-occur? Why do we see that these kids are at greater risk? And there are a couple of different pathways that I'd like to emphasize that will take us into talking a little bit about the treatment that we look at. So the first is the brain. And that is because kids who have challenges from a learning standpoint often have the challenges that they have in terms of their brain. So things like problem solving, how quickly they can process information, and their attention. Also, we see those challenges in disorders like ADHD, in disorders like autism, in disorders like anxiety and depression and behavior challenges. So what we know is that these challenges that they have at brain-based level really cut across these two areas. So if we can target those areas, we can help them both in terms of their learning and in terms of their mental health. The other thing that we know is that the lived experience for kids with learning disabilities is one that's a bit more challenging. So for many of these kids, they will experience failure quite frequently. I know these slides are a little hard to see, so I apologize for that. So they may experience some failure. They may have a lower sense of mastery because things have been harder for them. They may have anxiety about meeting expectations, and they may experience frustration, especially some of our kids who are gifted LD, who know that they're smart, they know that they understand it, and they just can't get their ideas across. And this can be so incredibly frustrating for many kids, especially when they have the insight to see this difference. And so what we see for these kids is that often what happens after time and time again that they experience challenge is that they end up feeling like, when I'm feeling this distress or something doesn't feel comfortable, I'm just going to avoid it. And there are many ways that they avoid it. So they might avoid homework, they may not be social and go out and be with friends or make friends. They may act out in order to get out of things. So they may talk out at class or be more of a class clown in order to get out of doing a math assignment, for instance, that might be more difficult for them. And we call that fight, flight, or freeze. Fight being that they take that discomfort and they turn it into fighting with their peers or with their parents, arguing with teachers. Flight being that they just don't engage. They might avoid doing homework, avoid doing things. And freeze being that they just don't know how to act. They just may get stuck in a certain mode of being. So taken together, what I really wanted to do when I was at Integra was to really help us to better understand these kids and to understand how can we treat their mental health difficulties in a way that really addresses this aspect of brain and experience. And so there were a few things that came to mind. The first was that we had to find a way to engage them. The second was that we had to find a way to keep them present. So we didn't want them to be avoiding all the time. We wanted them to be engaged and to stick with challenge. And if they stuck with challenge, they could experience success. And we all know that when you experience success, you get a good feeling about yourself and a feeling of self-esteem. And we also needed to adapt all of our therapy, because one of the things that we know is that therapy, just like if you're learning to read or write, therapy is learning, and so it needed to be adjusted to meet the different learning needs, and so that we could get that information into their brains and get it to stick. And then finally, we needed to promote a sense of mastery, so self-esteem in these kids, flexibility, trust in their fellow peers, and a sense of community that many of them were missing. And so the Integra Mindfulness Martial Arts program was developed, and this was developed at Integra, again, in 2001, 2002, in response actually to boys coming into the center who really didn't want to sit down and chat about their feelings, if you can imagine, at the age of 12 or 13. They weren't interested in coming into therapy. So we needed to find a way to hook them. And so one of the therapists who was at Integra had his black belt, and there was a child who was not interested whatsoever about talking about his feelings, but he found talking about mixed martial arts very interesting, and he would come into my colleague Paul's office to do that, and thus was the start of this program. So mindfulness martial arts integrates mindfulness training, cognitive therapy, and behavior therapy into mixed martial arts. And that mixed martial arts, you may be thinking, why are we treating these for kids who have behavior problems, for example? Why are we teaching them how to fight? And the reason is that mixed martial arts hooks the boys, the teenage boys, because it's cool, and it's got some social credibility. And it also gives them an experiential place to do something that's hard. Martial arts is very hard, and you have to be present. You need to figure out what your opponent is doing. You need to be flexible, and you can then practice some of the skills that we're teaching. So the mindfulness component, I won't go too much into each of these, but just to give you a sense, the mindfulness component really teaches you not really to get rid of your thoughts or your feelings, but rather to be aware of them, to accept them, and to be present. And it's from that present point, if I know I'm anxious or if I know that I'm upset, and I can stay present with that rather than reacting impulsively and hitting someone or running away, then I can choose to act in a new way. And from that, I can learn new skills. And so that's really the crux of mindfulness martial arts and what I'm going to be talking about in terms of our studies. So this program is a 20-week program for kids all with learning disabilities and mental health issues. The kids come in every single week to our dojo, which is basically our boardroom turned into a gym. And they participate in a martial arts class for an hour and a half, and then we meet with the parents as well to just really solidify the teachings of the evening. And so we've done a few past studies, but one of the major studies that I just wanted to talk about briefly was a study where we compared our MMA group to a waitlist control who didn't receive MMA. And all of these kids, again, they were all boys in this group, and they all had learning disabilities and mental health issues. And what we found was that for those boys who came in who had learning disabilities and ADHD, we found that they significantly improved in terms of externalizing behavior. So those are behaviors where kids may be aggressing towards others, that they were less aggressive at the end compared to those kids who didn't participate in treatment. And then if we took the subset of kids who had significant levels of anxiety, we found that those kids significantly improved in terms of their anxiety. And then finally, if we looked at the kids who had inattention difficulties and LDs, we found that they significantly improved in terms of some of their socialization with their peers. And so these results are really promising, and they really do mirror some of the other results in the literature about mindfulness. But one of the things that struck me was, how is it possible that we're putting all of these boys in the same room and they're all getting the same treatment and they're all taking away something that's different? They're all taking away that piece of it, be it social, be it about aggression, be it about anxiety, that they need for them. There must be something underneath that's helping them in terms of a process. And so I really became interested in this point at attention and experiential avoidance. So basically, mindfulness is all about attention. It's about paying attention to our thoughts and our feelings on purpose and sustaining that attention instead of engaging in impulsive behavior. And we knew from our boys, just in terms of interviews that I'd done with them, that this was very effective. So for example, one boy said, "I've been getting a lot of homework lately, and MMA kind of calms you down, so it's easier to just like sit down and do your homework. I'll be more calm, so I'm more focused on my work, and that makes it easier to do the work in the first place." So they learn that you can hate your homework, you can even just not like to do something, and you can still stay present with it and do it because it's better for you in the long term. And we can all think about that probably in our own lives and our jobs. There are aspects of things that we don't necessarily enjoy, but we can stay present and do. And that's a good life lesson for everyone. So one of the things that was very interesting to me is that while the research had shown that mindfulness can improve attention, no studies had looked at this at a brain-based level. And given that learning disabilities are a neurodevelopmental disorder, and we know they are a disorder that is brain-based, we were really interested in terms of looking at whether or not we're actually changing the brain by doing Integra mindfulness martial arts. And so being a clinical child psychologist who hadn't ventured into brain research yet, I partnered with Sid Segalowitz, who is the top researcher, I would say, in terms of EEG research, who's at Brock University. And we partnered together, and he's taught me a great deal in the last 3 or 4 years about ERP research. And so what we started to do was we started to look at if MMA can make changes in the brain in terms of attentional functioning. And that's what we applied to the Scottish Rite Charitable Foundation for support to complete. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that study. So we are about halfway through. This is probably, we haven't got all of the data analyzed that we've collected to date, but we're about halfway through our data collection now, and these are preliminary findings, but they're very, very exciting. Our treatment group for this particular part of we're up to about 35 now, but in terms of what we've analyzed so far, we've got 19 in our treatment group and 16 kids in our waitlist control group. Most of them, they're around typically beginning of adolescence in terms of being about 13 years old in both of our groups. We did start to include girls just because recruitment is a little challenging and we wanted to look at our girls as well. So we're starting to get a few girls in there as well. And then there's some more information, but you can see that all of the kids have a learning disability as well as a variety of mental health issues. And so I'm going to tell you about 2 different tasks that the kids do. So basically what happens is at the beginning of MMA, before they start the program, the kids come down to Ryerson to the Harry Rosen Stress Institute. And they come in for a 3-hour testing session. We do diagnostic interviews with them, and we also cap them. So it's kind of like you can see here that this girl has all of these electrodes just placed on her forehead, and basically what that does, are like microphones, and they amplify the sound or the frequencies of the brain waves so that we can record them. And so the kids come in and they play video games. I tell them they're video games. I don't know that they believe me, but they play a number of computer games while they're capped that get at their attention. So they have to press buttons when they see certain information or when they hear certain information. So there are two tasks I'm going to tell you about. The first task is an auditory task, and basically, if you can imagine, what we ask them to do is they have to put on a set of headphones, and they have to listen for whether they hear a high tone or a low tone, and if it's in their right or their left ear. And if it's a high tone and it's in their right ear, then they have to press a button. But if it's a low tone, they don't press it. And if it's a high tone and it's in their left ear, they don't press it. So it's a complicated task. It's not an easy one. And it's one that's well established in the literature for being able to get at attention. And they have to do this for about 15 minutes. So it's, as I said, they're not really video games. The kids always let me know that it could put a kid on a sugar high to sleep. I've heard that a number of times. So basically they do this task. And what we found from this particular task is this is all of the brain wave for the kids, the EEG wave. And what we see for the kids is that the kids in the treatment group are really allocating more attention to that target tone at the end of treatment than they did pre-treatment. Whereas our kids who are in the control condition are allocating the exact same amount of attentional resources. So that is the little part of the wave that we're looking at. It's called the P3, but it looks at attention allocation. And in a graph that we all may understand a little more, basically what we're seeing is an interaction. Hopefully this will come up even more as our numbers get bigger. But what we're seeing is that the control group over time is gradually decreasing the amount of attentional resources, and our treatment group is significantly increasing in terms of the attentional resources they pay to the target. So they're doing very well in terms of that. The second task is a visual task. And so basically what they have to do here, again, these fish, they flash on the screen. And they have to pay attention to that middle fish. And every single time that they see one that's facing the wrong direction, that incongruent condition, they have to press a button. And so basically what we see are the exact same results here in the visual field, is that our treatment kids significantly increase in terms of how much attention they're paying to that middle fish, be from pre-treatment to post-treatment, whereas our control kids are gradually decreasing over time. The other thing that we're seeing in this condition is that our treatment kids are actually getting faster at recognizing those differences as well. So from a processing speed standpoint, they're really able to notice these differences faster. So their brains are becoming much more active processors, both in terms of speed and how quickly they can allocate those attentional resources. And it's right in the area of the brain that we would hope it would be. So these are really promising findings, and we still are at just half of our sample size at this point. So going forward, we're very excited to finish up our data collection and to start to link this to other findings, specifically our behavioral findings, so that we can look at how do these brain-based differences map onto differences in the day-to-day lives of our kids as well. So all in all, what we're seeing is improved indices at the brain level for attention, which is exactly what we were hoping for. So our future directions, we're going to start to look at what makes the difference, which kids make the most change. These are some of the questions we'll be asking in the coming months. So for example, like what type of mental health challenge do they have? What type of learning disability do they have? What's their IQ? How good are they in terms of attending the program and doing some of the home practice that we give them? We don't call it homework. Is there a difference between girls and boys? We're really interested in that question as well. And then also, as I was saying, how it links on to some of the outcomes. So how much stress these students are experiencing, their behavior, and their social emotional outcomes. And I think while it's not part of this specific research project, one of the things that we are doing right now is we've taken the MMA program actually to the high school in Haliburton. And I think when we think of Haliburton, we think of cottages. It's a beautiful area in the summertime, but it actually goes back and forth with Manitoulin Island as being one of the areas of greatest poverty in Ontario. And so we've taken MMA to the classroom, and we're finding, well, we haven't done brain-based work there yet, we're finding similar wonderful outcomes with the program. And the school board actually has just brought it on as a 4-credit course. So now kids with learning disabilities can actually get credit for improving their attention and their self-regulation outcomes. So I think that's probably one of my proudest accomplishments, is being able to help bring that to them. So we look forward to sharing some of those results with everyone as we move forward as well.